Hello everyone, and today we're going to dive into Ruy Lopez and what we're doing against it, mainly focusing on the fifth move, c3 from white. So let's start. White is beginning with the move e4, the king's pawn. We're replying with the e5, accepting the challenge for the center. Knight comes to f3, targeting the pawn on e5. We are defending with knight c6, and here comes the move of the Spanish or Ruy Lopez, which is bishop b5. This is more ambitious approach from white because white immediately challenging our knight in the way that white is attacking the pawn on e5, and there are potential ideas of taking on c6 and winning the pawn on e5, so we have to be careful. So a6 is one of the main moves. Here, of course, there is opportunity for white to take on c6 and step with the bishop away, but the main move, the more ambitious one, is to keep the bishop on this diagonal so that there is always an opportunity to take the knight on c6, putting the pressure on the pawn on e5. And here we're going for an interesting approach. First of all, in this position, there is already such move as knight g7, which is called the Cozio defense. And we're going to go for the a6, bishop a4, and then going for knight g7. So we could call it Cozio deferred or deferred Cozio defense. The main point here is that there are many moves, quite many moves from black. I mean, one of the also main moves going for was knight to f6. Knight on e7, we can say it's located on the more passive square compared to the knight on f6. But there are some ideas. First of all, we don't want knight on e7, obviously. We want the knight on g6. The good thing about this, knight from g6, first of all, it's going to control the pawn on e5. Secondly, it's going to control some squares on f4. It will free the way from the f pawn to, at some moment, strike the center with f5. And there are many other ideas. But of course, the main disadvantage is that we're spending two moves on knight g7 and knight g6. So here white has some time to do something, and we have to be sure to know how to react on the moves. And one of the main moves which can be played is c3. So very popular approach, basically saying that white wants to go immediately with a pawn to d4, challenging the center and recapture the pawn on recapture with the pawn, since we are not putting pressure on the pawn on e5 as it would be with the move knight f5. And here we are going with a knight to g6, second move with a knight, but we are locating it on the position where we wanted it. Now the pawn on e5 is under control, and we are ready to challenge the center in case white goes for d4. So d4 is definitely the main move, but there is also, of course, immediate castle and h4. The castle would most likely transpose. For example, after castle, we are already going for d5, and we would discuss this opening in the other chapter via the fifth move, castle move order. So there we are. There you will find this position. So basically, if white wants to go for d4, white has to go right away. The other interesting option is to include h4 in the position. The main point is, of course, that black would reply with the h5. And, well, the problem here is, okay, let me just try to show. If we play h5 in this position, then white would go with a d4. And basically, if we're going to take, white will take with a pawn and try to have the center, and white will have the very nice square on g5. So that's why after h4, we shouldn't really use our time for h5, since our knight would jump to f4 if pawn comes to h5. So here we have a very nice developing move, bishop e7. We're developing the bishop, targeting the pawn on h4, and now it's a question for white what to do. Either defend the pawn or push it forward or do something else, so playing something like d4, sacrificing a pawn, but it's definitely up to white. So in case white goes for g3, here already we can see that white spent 1-2 moves on this h4 plan. So here we can already stop the pawn with h5. We're not letting pawn coming to h5, because also pawn from g3 took care of the h4 and f4 square, so our knight cannot jump anywhere. So here we go h5, stopping it. And here we are ready to face d4. At this moment, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. Well, if we're just going to take on d4, then white is going to recapture with the pawn, having a nice center, so it's not really working so well. That's why we have an immediate strike in the center with d5, because our pawns are fully protected on d5 and e5. In case white wants to win a pawn, there are going to be consequences. Let's see. For example, if bishop takes on c6, trying to take the pawn on e5, knight takes, pawn takes, and here, if we would take on e4, then there would be some issues concerning, because we would just take the pawn on e4, our pawn would be weak, and also we would let trade of the queens. So we play bishop g4, attacking the queen. So f3 is played, and now we move the bishop away. We're down one pawn, but this pawn is not really fully defended. We have an exchange the bishop pair and full compensation for this pawn. In case knight takes on e5 immediately using kind of this pin on the knight, then we are taking with the g knight on e5, pawn takes, and now we have b5 intermediate move targeting the bishop. So if bishop goes to b3, well, it's not a good move, because after knight takes on e5, queen takes d5. Okay, white is attacking two pieces at the same time. We have to react. So here we have bishop g4, super important move. We're sacrificing a knight. So of course, there are many moves now here for white, but the most challenging is taking the knight, accepting the piece. And here we already go with queen to d3, challenging white and offering, not offering, but threatening a checkmate. So white has to play f3. Now queen takes, again, another threat. Rook can stop checkmate from h2. And now we're introducing another piece in the game. The a rook is coming with some threats already, with rook coming to d1. And by the way, the other piece is already hanging, but we can sacrifice pieces because white's pieces on the queen side, they're not doing anything. And okay, also this bishop on b3 is barely doing much, only stopping the rook d1 check, otherwise it would be checkmate. So in case queen e8, then we bring the other rook into the game, and this looks like a complete disaster and losing position for white. So if white is trying to create their own threats, playing bishop f4, threatening checkmate, well, here we are using our rook and sacrificing it. Now we're going to be down full rook in the position, check. We do give up a couple of checks. King comes to g2, important that the rook is now passive on h2, rook cannot get out. And now we have to defend from the checkmate on c7, playing bishop d6. So queen d5, of course we could have continued, we could have just made a draw like this, but we have more than that. So bishop d6, attacking the queen, queen d5, and now we take the bishop. There are already threats. I mean, if white is going for queen a8, after king d7, white could resign because the checkmate is coming. So white has to take. Now we bring the other rook, queen e8 check, now king d7, a couple of checks happen, and basically after king f8 there are no more, meaningful checks. Okay, not on c5, but we will hide. And the rook is coming to the d3, to the d1, and well, the checkmate is unavoidable here, unless white will sacrifice a lot of pieces not to get checkmated. So that was bishop b3. If queen takes on d5, if queen takes on d5, queen takes ed, knight e5, bishop b3, bishop b5. So now we're already having a nice position here because our pieces are much more active, even though we're down a pawn. But it feels like this pawn is going to be weak due to the pieces' inactivity. We going to win it back very soon. If not, then we are just going to have good positions. The many light squares of white are very weak, so it's definitely tough for white to handle all these threats with like knight d3, knight f3, and so on. So in case white takes on d5 with the pawn, well, then it's actually going to be a huge mistake, since now we take with the knight on e5, bishop goes to b3, and now bishop g4 again. This is our idea, developing the bishop with the tempo. Queen c2, no real good square for the queen, but okay, queen c2 is the only square. Now queen d7, and basically saying that for this pawn which white took, we have enormous lead in the development. We are ready to finish the castle. White's pieces are still standing there. If white's king is going to castle short side, there will be a lot of weaknesses on the light squares. So it's pretty tough for white, and computer already saying that white is losing here. Bishop c2 looks the most logical to defend the pawn on e4 also. So we're taking on e5. Now queen takes on d5, then we're just going to trade, and after bishop b7, well, we're just attacking the pawn and we're going to win it back and having preferable position, slightly better at least according to the engine. Bishop f4 attacking the knight is another option for white. Here we go with knight to g6, because the problem is if we go bishop g4 in this position already, it's completely different, since here queen can take on d5 with a tempo, so it's not really working out for black. So knight g6, we're just moving with the knight back and attacking the bishop at the same time. Bishop goes back to e3, and now bishop b7. Okay, the same idea, putting the bishop on this diagonal, defending the pawn, also attacking on e4 at the same time. And well, we at least have equal chances. I mean, we didn't give up the pawn since white didn't take on d5, and we have around similar positions. But I would say due to this light square weaknesses on the king side, we might have some edge later. That was a g3 move. Now we're moving into the d4. What happens if white includes h4 and then going for d4? Well, here, even though white is going for the d4, the h4 pawn is not under protection. And that was our main idea with bishop e7, attacking the pawn on h4. And since white is neglecting that, we're just taking. And also we're having another threat of taking on g2 or trading the knight. So there are two threats already in the position. In case knight takes on h4, we're taking with a bishop d5. Now we shouldn't be worried about d5 because pawn on e5 is not attacked by the knight on f3. But the most important is, of course, we don't really have a good square for the knight if we go back. So that's why the only good square is knight coming with knight to a5. For example, if knight a7, there would be immediate d6, cd, and after bishop b3, there are so many weaknesses in dark positions, so it's not working out. We have to go knight a5 here, and main idea is that we're going to push away the bishop, and bishop couldn't go actually on b3 because there it would be just traded by the knight. So in case white still tries to go for the d6, well, here we can already take, and in case queen takes, we have queen f6, attacking the queen, attacking the pawn, offering a trade, and we're, by the way, up a pawn. And if queen goes to d5, trying to use the light square's weaknesses, where we go for castle. Okay, we can, of course, agree that white has compensation for the pawn due to our weaknesses and could take on d6 at some moment, but now we already castled, so there is not going to be stopping any castle after queen takes d6, and maybe slowly we can just try to get rid of this queen on d5 and put back the knight, because now already there is no pawn on d5, or knight could go back. Or we could also start preparing, going for the b5, kicking the bishop from a4. So that's another move. In case white is just continuing development normally with knight e2, there we are going for bishop g5, removing the bishop away from the h4, so it cannot be, there are no tricks there anymore. And of course, one of the ideas are just pinning also these pieces on d2 and c1, and also f4 square is getting under control. Before, white is trying immediately to start attack, but we shouldn't worry, because as long as bishop is on a4, we will always have a counterattack with b5. So now b5 attacking the bishop. If bishop goes away, we have a c4 very nice square. And basically, that's our main threat, to take on d2 and to jump with a knight on the beautiful c4 square, which will be tough to handle for white. So that was d4. Now let's see what happens if white is continuing pushing with h5. Well, he have a beautiful square on f4. Why not? We're just coming there. We have now threats coming with a knight to d3 or taking the pawn on g2. So of course d4 is the most preferable, because if knight is coming to d3, then d4 is not happening and king is being exposed. So that would not really work out well. So d4 should be played. The idea of white is to sacrifice a pawn for the center. So we're happy we're taking the pawn and also compromising the king. Now king cannot castle any longer, but king of one attacking our knight. If we go back on f4, it wouldn't be good because after d5, which is attacking our knight on c6, then there is going to be an issue with our pawn on e5. Knight would simply take it. So we have to go with the knight to h4, attacking the knight on f3, threatening the trade, and then the pawn on e5 would be okay. So for example, in case of d5, now we here have intermezzo knight takes f3. If pawn takes on c6, we just go back on knight on g6. Our knight can also go back to e6, very nice square. And it's fully safe, and we're, by the way, up a pawn. If queen takes on f3, then we have knight a5 again. So this is very topical. The knight is coming to a5 with the idea of later going with b5, and knight will have squares on c4, or in the worst case on b7. And bishop from a4 will have some issues to get back. It will not be able to go to b3, so it will have to go to the c2 square. So in case of queen g3, attacking our pawn on g7, here we go bishop f6, defending both pawns at the same time. Knight e2, and now b5. Finally, we're attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to c2, of course, and knight c4. We're just putting the knight on the very good square. Basically, we are still up a pawn, up the g pawn. Of course, looking at the position, feels like white has more space on the king side, and generally, maybe there could be some initiative ongoing later, but so far we are solid. We cannot say that it's a full extra pawn, but definitely we have an extra pawn, and white will still have to try to claim the compensation. Rook g1, attacking the pawn on g7, very logical, putting pressure, but now with a rook. So now we can go with g5 because e5 is not under attack, and we're actually in time even to castle because the position is now closed with the pawns on h5 and g5. So after h6, we're just castling, knight d2, and king goes to h8. So everything is well defended. In the worst case, we can always play f6 to defend the pawns, and it's not so easy to find a way for white to break through on the king side. Meanwhile, we're going to push for b5, get a nice square with a knight on c4, and okay, slowly just either try to break the pawn on d5 with c6, and we're going to see, because there are definitely a lot of ideas for black in that position. We're still up a pawn. In case knight is taking on e5, so trying to win back the pawn, well, we have to take, of course, since if we're just castling, then it's just going to be a pretty messy position. It's possible, definitely, but it's very much tough, and also our knight on h4 is almost trapped. So it's better to take on e5, pawn takes, and now we go b5, attacking the bishop. At the same time, we threaten to develop the bishop on b7, or at some moments also on a6. So now bishop goes to b3, we castle, and in this position, in case white goes all ambitious with h6, trying to attack our king position, we go g6, stopping the ideas of opening up the position and just locking the king side. So now bishop f4, a5. So our idea is, of course, we want to push for a4 to get more space and attack the bishop. And white is stopping it by playing a4 themselves. We got to take on a4, rook e4, and now king h8, just removing the king. So the next idea is to go for the f5 or g5. So we're going to open up the position against the white's king. Our king is going to be safe on h8 because there is nothing happening on the h file. But yeah, very interesting position. Sometimes we can go for bishop a6, but obviously rook a6 could also work to bring the rook on the 6th rank. So we're going to see that later. And looking at the king's position, if we manage to open up the files, the white's king is going to be much weaker than ours. So rook g1, at this moment, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So here, since, the rook is coming to g1, creating a threat, but there is a very nice sequence of moves because we can actually go d5. First of all, we're stopping the idea of queen coming to g4, attacking our pawn on g7. And secondly, if white is going for h6, we're just checking on h3. We're creating this very nice check. So king has to go. The problem is it's tough to find a square, but okay, for example, if after king e2, there is already bishop g2 with a threat of bishop f3 and also with a threat of taking the bishop on h6, so it's very tough to handle. So now if king goes to e1, then we're taking with a pawn on e4 and introducing a threat of knight to f3. So let's say rook g7, white is taking the pawn, king goes back, rook goes back on f3, not allowed that it's a fork. Now we go rook g8. We're not allowing bishop g7 because it would be disaster. So here queen trade is happening, and after rook h3, rook g1, king e2, now knight g2, we sacrifice the whole piece. But due to the problem of white on the queen side with all the pieces, and due to the checkmate in one thread, which is right now there in the position, white will have to actually give up the rook on a1 after knight a3. And if it's not happening, then either we are going to checkmate or we are going to win a lot of material. So position is definitely looks like for human eye crushing. For computer is still possible to hold, but definitely position will be worse for white. So bishop goes to e3, developing the piece and also defending at the same time. Now we're ready to go with the a5, again creating a threat of the a4 and making a square for the bishop or the rook at some moment. So f4, white is trying to have a square on the f2 with the king, so that in case of the check, there would be no fork and nothing like that. So bishop b7, now we're already see that since the long diagonal got weakened a lot, we can put and attack pieces on this diagonal with the bishop. Knight e2, white is defending the pawn on e4. Now d5, we're breaking the center. We are already breaking absolutely every piece. So of course, pawn cannot really take on d6. It would weaken a lot, and we're threatening to take on e4. Looks like an amazing position for black to get. Our king is in safety, while white king will have some issues. So that was this h4 move, which is pretty interesting, but of course it's really not working. So now we're going to go into the d4, because the d4 is kind of the main move and the main approach and the main question. Because if we just spend two moves with the knight, and white could manage to get the center, strong center, then it shouldn't work. But in this case, of course, we have our own ideas. So here we are taking immediately on d4, and we have to do it. Here there are also a couple of moves, and white could also try to go with the h4. So let's first start with what happens if knight takes on d4. It's a very interesting move, but it's actually doesn't look logical, because since white played c3, white wants to take with a pawn on d4. But okay, this move is possible, so let's take a look and see what we should do. So here, if we're just going to take the knight on d4, then we are just going to get white's their dream position, and our moves such as d5 will never be possible due to the spin. So it's not going to be possible. So bishop c5, we're just developing and targeting the knight on d4 one more time. In case of the castle, we are castling, and then we're going to transpose to the chapter with the fifth move, the main move, castle. So there you are going to see all the rest. In case bishop comes to c3, which looks very logical, defending the knight on d4 and creating a threat of taking on c6, well, here we have a very nice move, knight c5. So first of all, since we can see that the breaks of d5 and f5 are not really happening next time, so that, I mean, of course, there is a problem here with a pin. Here, knight is fully controlling the f5 break. So we occupy the e5 square in front of the pawn, in front of the e4 pawn, because it's slight advantage for white to have this pawn in the center, because it brings more, gives white more space, it gives some extra opportunities. So we have to try to either break the center or to use the fact. So we put our knight on this nice square in front of the pawn. Of course, it's not an outpost because it always can be kicked. So yeah, but it's very beautiful square from which we can go later to c4 or to g4, targeting the bishop on e6. So we have to try to use these squares for our pieces to remaneuver to get better position. So in case white goes here with knight to f5, it's not a bad move, but queen e2 would be better. So here we just trade the pieces. And even though knight was like jumping around here, 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 it went at the end to the beautiful square, which is e3. And again, it's stopping our ideas of going for f5 and d5. Okay, here we are already ready to go for b5 and bring the bishop to b7, our typical idea. If bishop goes to b3, it's not really good because it's just going to give us extra tempo, since after bishop b7, the pawn is under attack. So if there is no real good way to defend the pawn. It's going to be always the span of the tempo. So here, let's say white is castling, just not protecting the pawn, and after bishop e4, going f4, immediately trying to challenge our pieces in the center. Now knight d3, bishop d5. There are already many threats. Attack on the bishop on e4, also the knight on d3. And here after f5, we're sacrificing, basically here we're sacrificing our exchange, which is very important, to get very strong pieces on d4, on e4 and d3. So now we're having definitely a compensation for it. Knight on d3 is a monster, also bishop on e4 as well. There are no open files for the rooks, so far we have definitely a compensation for this exchange, and we will have ideas again, attack against the king, finish development, bring our pieces out, and so on. We could try to march forward like with c4, c5, c4, trying to defend the knight, establish a very nice square on d3 as well. So very nice idea from black. So that's why bishop c2 looks very logical, since it depends upon on e4. And here, after bishop b7, okay, of course we have to develop bishop on e7, but pawn is already defended, so that's kind of an advantage comparison to previous line. Castle happens, and now white wants to kick our knight. So we have to be very careful, because if f4 is happening, then we're having an issue. So he have to go queen f6, stopping the f4 break. So now f4 cannot happen, so white continues development with knight e2. Now castle happens, g3. Pointing out again, white wants to go for f4 once again, because of course before g3 was not possible due to the knight f3. Now, since knight is on d2, it's covering the square on f3, and now next move f4 is possible. So we go now in a different direction. We go with the queen to b6, very nice move. We're pointing out that we have a bishop from b7, queen from b6, pointing out that there are problems on the king side. And in case f4 happens, it would weaken the dice squares a lot. So let's see possible continuation here. Like after queen e2, we go for d6. In case of f4, we already have knight g4 attacking the knight. So let's see, after rook a1, we just go back with the knight. Now we're already not allowing this f4 coming with the tempo. Now f4 goes, rook f to e8, and now queen f2. And now our knights remaneuvering from e5 to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. Even though there is more space and looks like this pawn are very strong, but we have very nice ideas against attack of the e4 pawn. And anytime something happens with this, and if it moves or something, then we're going to have always this very nice diagonal. So it's very difficult for white to hold this space advantage for long, because there is enormous pressure from which we are always making and building up on it. So that was a knight f5 line. In case of queen e2, it makes more sense because it's stopping the knight coming to c4, and generally it's a better move. So now we go b5, where we want anyway to go for the knight to c4. So in case of bishop c2, knight c4, no problem. So bishop b3 has to be played to control the c4 square. Now we again go with queen to f6, stopping the f4 ideas. And okay, of course, potentially we could also put our knight on f4 as well. So in case castle happens, then we have this knight f4, very nice move. If bishop takes, we're happy that, okay, we got the bishop pair now, a good position. Basically, our pieces are well developed. We are ready to castle. And okay, we have a very nice bishop on c5, and yeah, even later pushing for the f4 is not going to be such a big deal because the bishops are super strong on c5 and b7. That was a castle. In case knight comes to d2, white is trying to keep the options of castling long or short, so it's more tricky from white's side. Here we're going for d6 and also introducing idea of knight coming to g4 in order to attack the bishop on e3. So now h6, h3, white is trying to stop that, now castle. In case of long castle happens, it's just going to allow us immediately include our pawns into attack. Since our pawn is already on b5, we can go for b4, targeting the white's position, and we have a very nice counterattack. In case of g3, white wants to go for f4. Well, here we are going for bishop d4, take. In case bishop takes, then we have c5. And even though we gave up our bishop, giving bishop pair, we are gaining a lot of space in the position. So bishop b7, pointing out that it could be a weakness on e4, f4. Now knight d3, we're getting with the knight all the way to d3. So white gives back the bishop. We're giving a pawn for time being, and after queen e6, f5, it feels like we're losing material again, but we have knight e5 intermediate move. And these pawns are now stable. They are not stable, but rather they are fixed. They cannot really move forward or backwards. So there could be some tricks connected to this pawns, because could be easily attacked, especially the pawn on e4. And yeah, we're just having nice chances as well as white. We're down a pawn, but for sure there is a big compensation because of all our active pieces. And also, it's not so clear for white what to do with the king. So if pawn takes on d4, it looks more logical, but here there is knight f6, knight c6, sorry, attacking the pawn on d4. And what to do with white? So if, for example, bishop comes to d5 using the fact of the spin, there is, of course, knight g7, attacking the bishop, defending the knight on c6. So it's not working. Let's start with queen d3. Queen d3, there is just a5, and basically we threaten to go the a4 and also b4 and other ideas with bringing the bishop into the position via a6 are very dangerous. So knight f3 is another idea, trying to defend the pawn on d4. And here we have h6. Okay, now the ideas coming with the bishop to g5 are already very annoying, so we have to stop it. In case white goes for long castle, again we have a5, and we are attacking against the king on the queen side. In case white goes g4 here, well, then we have knight f4, getting a very nice square on f4 with a knight. e5, white wants to win a piece here because we cannot really defend on f4, since after pawn takes, we take on e5 and bishop takes on f4. Of course, if we take on e4, then our knight on e5 is hanging, so we go knight g6, attacking the bishop on f4, and also we want to use this the longest diagonal, a8 to h1, in order to put some pressure on the knight on f3. So bishop goes to e5, we go queen c6, and after short castle, we have bishop b7, and knight cannot really jump away since there is going to be a checkmate on g2 or h1. So let's say rook f comes to c8, then we're to c1, sorry. Then we are taking on f3, trading the queens, getting into this endgame where even though a computer would say that maybe white is slightly better here due to this bishop pair, I would say that since the position of the king is a bit compromised with the pawns on h3 and g4, we should have a compensation for that. So I don't think that we're much worse. Definitely, we're holding this endgame, and there are some issues for white as well in terms of the pawns. And if we manage to trade our light squared bishop for white's light squared bishop, there are not going to be any issues at all. So that was the line with knight takes on d4. After we took on d4. So h4, white is trying to get into the line which we just discussed with h4, with the idea that now if we, for example, play h5, then white would capture on d5 with a pawn, and it would be different, not something what we wanted against this. So that's why here the move is super important, which we're going to play. Because, for example, if we're just taking on c6, c3, which feels like also a tempo intermezzo move, after knight c3, so after taking on c3, we're just helping to bring white another piece in the position. The knight comes on c3, developing move. And now, for example, after bishop b4, after h5, knight g5, h6 already, we take on c3, bc, queen f6, knight e5, queen e5, bishop e3. His position is already slightly better, at least for white. I would say already clearly better because of this bishop pair. So yeah, white is down a pawn, but with advantage with a pawn on h6. We're not doing well, many threats in the position. So that's why it's very important to remember here that we don't want to let white to develop so fast. And not to do so, it means we shouldn't play neither take on c3 nor h5. We're playing d3, very strong move. The main idea is that white put the pawn on c3. Now the knight cannot develop on c3 so quickly, and also take on d4 is not happening. So we're slowing down white's position, but at the same time, of course, we're letting h5 to be played, but it's of course not so good. So white has to take on d3. Okay, h5 is also possible. We'll take a look in the moment. So queen takes on d3. Now we are ready to go for h5. Now we get completely different position. Now it's completely different. So if we're just playing again, if we're playing here h5 after pawn takes, just compare this to this. It's completely different position. No knight is coming to c3. There is no pawn on d4 as well. So bishop e3, white is trying still to finish the development. Bishop e3, then knight is going to come at some moment. Bishop e7, knight bd2. Now d6. Basically, we're just developing absolutely normally. This was actually taken from the game again, Frederick Svane against Narayanan. So long castle, bishop g4, developing the bishop. And here was actually in the game, bishop d7 was played, but bishop g4 more ambitious could be also played. At the same time also pinning this knight to the rook. So there could be ideas of knight jumping to e5 already. So main idea here is that we could create an attack, bring the bishop to f6 and start attack against the king. We can castle short, of course. It doesn't look like white is going to have an attack on the king side soon, but we can start with pushing the pawns with b5, b4, and so on, just creating a threat against white's king. And we can decide what to do next. And in case we are scared of something on the king side, we could also castle long if we want. But yeah. We are going to see and we will decide. Also, the pawn on h4 is hanging. Let's not forget about that. So, of course, if we're taking the pawn on h4, it's going to be definitely much safer to castle long. So if white goes for h5 here, that's another critical approach. So here we go knight g to e5, knight e5, knight e5. Now we're defending the pawn. And here f4. I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So I hope you found the move, and it is of course not moving the knight back, but going for forward, going for a counterattack. Since if we're just moving the knight to c4, after queen d3, it's a tempo on the knight. And after we go d4, b5, which looks very beautiful, okay, we defend, we're attacking at the same time. Bishop c2, and the bishop is in a much better square. Since if we start with b5 rather, there is only one square for the bishop to come is on b3, not on c2 any longer. So either white trades the knight, so takes the knight and we take the bishop, or bishop goes back to b3, and of course going back with the bishop is better. Now we go knight c4, and now the bishop is on different square, it's not on c2. Now we are ready to sacrifice the pawn already because we don't have really good squares for the knight. And we're just going to get the bishop pair also as compensation. So we go for d5 instantly. Attacking the center and offering white to take the pawn on d5. Another option could be to go with a bishop to b7. It was also played already, but we suggest to go with a pawn on d5. So of course, take with a queen or with a pawn. Let's start with the queen. In case of the queen takes, e d5. Bishop e7, now we're attacking the pawn. We're just going to get back the pawn, and we have we'll have very good endgame. Knight e2, knight b6, attacking the pawn, not letting all the straights on c4. So yeah, now we're going to take on d5 in the next move and just have a decent endgame, like around equal chances. If pawn takes on d5, then we have bishop c5. We're stopping white from castling short. So queen e2, white is trying to give a check first. So here, king d7, we shouldn't be worried. It's definitely much better square than f8, even though it looks a bit awkward stopping our bishop from c8, but we introduce the idea of rook coming to the e8. And after queen g4, which is check, white will be forced to repeat because, okay, we can also go for king d6. Because after f5, we have rook e8, king d1, knight e3, bishop takes and bishop takes. So we're just getting in this this position. But okay, king on d6 looks not so good. So after king e7, white basically has to repeat with queen e2. Since if white is not repeating and going, let's say, for queen g5, then we go for king d6. Now there is no check. And okay, here also f6 is also a winning move, but okay, king d6 is offering a trade of the queens, and after king d1, queen g5 takes, bishop g4, check, check, and now we take on d5, and we're going to have, we're having such an enormous piece activity in the positions that this endgame is going to be winning, and it's already winning position. If queen takes on g7, then we have rook g8 attacking the queen. So now queen takes h7, and now rook e8. So now there is no check with a queen. And we're going to move the king to f8 or d6. We're going to see, it depends. And then there is going to be an issue for the white king, and basically already again winning position for black. Queen comes to e2 back, then okay, king d7, queen g4 looks like a perpetual. So that's what white could do. That was h4. And now we're going for the cd, which is main line. That's how usually people react. It's the most common move. White is getting this nice center with two pawns. So that's why it's very important for us. If we're just going to play next few moves without really causing any issues, white is going to be great. White is going to do amazing due to the center. That's why we have to do and cause some issues. And first move which we're playing is bishop b4, checking the king and asking which piece white would put where, like bishop comes to d2 or knight c3 or what to do at all. So yeah, we develop quickly with a tempo on the king. So now some questions. For example, let's start, the main move is knight comes to d3, knight comes to c3, but bishop d2, let's start with this move because it was also played by grandmasters Wesley So and Peter Swidler. So bishop to d2, stopping the check and hoping to trick black, because it's a question, and very often bishop takes on d2 without thinking. So here we have to be slow and understand that we shouldn't rush into helping white, because taking on d2 would be a help for white to develop, because queen on d2 is one step closer to the long castle. So potentially white could go also short or long, and after knight c3, just consider. So here, for example, after d5 could be an interesting try. After ed, queen d5, knight c3, queen e6, queen e3. Yeah, well, okay, there is already it's already a tough position, because here it's very tough choice right now, because the d5 is a threat. After take on e6, you should take either with a pawn or like with the bishop. There is this d5 move. So either we have to help white to connect the pawns, or we have to separate our pawns ourselves. So it's a tough choice, tough position. So in case we short castle after knight c3, it's amazing position for white. It's something what they want to do. But that happens if we don't do what we're supposed to do in this position, then we're getting such bad position. So we have to understand, we have to react fast, and we have to react proper. And so that's why in this position, our bishop is defended by the knight. So we can't really leave it there. We can't leave it on b4 and castle short. We're finishing our development. We're castling short, and at some moment we are already ready to strike with d5. So let's start. First, what happens if white is not letting us and goes d5 themselves, attacking the knight? Okay, d5 is good move, expanding the pawn, but it weakens the e4 square. And here we're already ready to take on d2 because after queen d2, we have an intermediate move b5. Even though knight c5 would probably be the same, but we have b5 intermezzo. Bishop, if bishop goes to c2, then we have knight c5, knight e5, knight e5, castle, and we are breaking with the 5. We are in time. We are in time before this whole thing starts with f4. So now pawn takes, and we also have a very nice c4 square. We are ready to take the pawn on f5. We have a good pawn structure, good position. The d5 is weak, so for that, definitely have good chances in this endgame. Bishop goes to b3, then we're again going knight c to e5, knight take, and after castle. Now it's already a big threat because there is no knight c4. So here we have to follow other rules. Here we have to go for a5 already. We allowed f4. So now a4 happens. We're taking the bishop. And now bishop, if white is taking on e5, we're just going to have a very interesting position where white has all these pawns in the center, but we're going to play against this pawn structure. So after a3, of course, white has to stop take on a2. We have queen e7 attacking the pawn. The only way to defend is queen f4. Now we have b4 attacking the pawn on a3, so rook f3, white is trying to defend. And now f5, breaking these pawns. We're trying to make this pawn structure weaker and weaker. So pawn takes on f5, now d5 is weaker because it lost its defense. So we're going with the bishop to b7, attacking the pawn on d5. And position is, of course, very complex. But looking at the pieces of white on the queen side and the pawns, okay, they look beautiful. If we look at the first glance the position, the pawns look beautiful, but they're actually weak. They're actually weak because now we already target the pawn on d5. We are ready to target the pawn on e5, especially when the pawn is not on e4 like before. It's very much more difficult to defend all these pawns together. So for that, there is definitely a counterattack from black. If bishop goes to c2, then we have this knight c4 nice intermediate move, attacking the queen, and our knight is getting very nice square. Queen d4, white is bringing the queen to the center, of course, like defending all the pawns. By the way, fully controlling the center, and now we go queen f6, offering a trade. His queen takes gf, and basically the position is a bit tricky. Okay, we have this weakness, but the pawn on e4, it looks like the pawn is could be attacked, could be pressured on e5. So there could be some ideas. Also, the g file got open. It could be also another idea for black to strike. The ideas of playing bishop e7 and breaking this pawn chain with a 5 is another idea. Trying to point out that d5 and e4 could be weaknesses. So yeah, but e5 is another move, more aggressive, attacking our queen. So here we have to move away on b6 again. We are trying to offer a trade again. And even though the pawns promoted so much, expanded with on d4 and e5, actually these pawns are not so strong. Again, due to the fact that white's pieces are still behind a little bit. So bishop b7 could be a next move, attacking the pawn on d5. Also f6, breaking the pawn chain of f4 and e5 could be played. So these pawns could be targeted in the endgame. And for that, there is for sure at least an equality in this position for black. That was the d5 move. And if bishop takes on b4, this move was actually played by both So and Sweetler. Here we're taking with the knight on b4, of course. If knight goes to c3, it's a bit too slow because we are already in time with going forward with d5, breaking the center. And after a3, we just take on e4, and well, we're already getting a much better position. So queen d2, white is attacking the knight. But now we don't need to go back with a knight, since the attack is not by the pawn, but by the queen. So we have time for queen e7, double attack, rather double defense attack, defending the knight on b4 and attacking the pawn on e4. So here knight c3 is defending, and again we have the d5 break, attacking the pawn, defending the knight. So yeah, great position we have. In case white goes e5, we go for c4, and after a3 again we have intermediate move taking on d4. After queen takes, knight e5, very nice move. The very nice trick on which is actually whole position is holding right now, that at the end of the story there is knight d3 check. So in case white is castling, we're just going to take on f3 and bring back knight to c6. White is taking back the pawn. It's not white winning the pawn, taking back. And after queen g5, queen e3, trade happens. We're just getting around equal position in the endgame. So let's see what happens if white is getting the material. Then after knight e5, queen e5, knight d3. This is the trick I'm talking about. We're winning back the material. So knight e5, knight d5, and now bishop e6. We're having a round equal endgame with equal chances as well. White's king is already in the center. Is it good or a bad thing? We're going to see. So it was queen d2. In case a3 immediately, now we have to react because now we don't have time for any d5 business. So we have to go back with the knight to c6. d5, attacking our knight on c3, of course possible. Now we go b5, another intermediate move, similar to previous moves. We always have this b5 intermediate, asking the bishop where does it want to go. In case of bishop c2, we go knight c2 e5, trade happens again, and we're just getting a square on c4 for the knight, getting similar positions like before. We could also go with the f5 break in this position, playing d6 later, taking back the pawn. So it looks great. In case of bishop b3, then we go knight e5, attacking the bishop. And after bishop a2, we have c5 now, getting some kind of Benoni pawn structure if we put the pawn on d6. And we already have pawn on b5, which is of course biggest difference compared to the Benoni pawn structure. Is that we already have this and there is no pawn on a4 which is stopping it. While bishop on a2 is not the best piece in the world, so this position is already slightly better for black. In case of castle, we have d5 again similar idea. If white is going for the e5, we actually might get similar positions in the other lines. We could have, of course, always break with the f6, but at the same time, if case white, for example, takes on c6 takes, there could be breaks also with c5, the deferred pawn, so that's possible. So now knight c3, white is preventing our d5 idea fully. And now we have to go for d6, a bit more passive, but since d5 is not happening, now we can start going for the f5. So h3, white is stopping the bishop g4. And this was actually played in the game Sweetler against Demchenko. So now f5, and here was knight c7 was played. But here we can go immediately with f5, break in the center. So in case white goes to h4, well, it's pretty much saying that white most likely will not really castle, because white would not really want to open up the position so much. So we go for b5, attacking the bishop. It's always an idea. Now bishop b3, we have knight a4, attacking bishop a2, and knight comes to c4. Is always a good idea. Now, if bishop goes to c2, we have bishop g4. Now this square, after h4 has been played, this square is getting so much weak for white, so that we can occupy the square immediately. Queen d2, bishop takes f3, take. We managed to create a pawn, the pawn weaknesses, and now after queen f6, basically we're just going to win the pawn. There going to be an issue with d4, the issue with f3, also very nice f4 square. That was h4 move. And in case of the castle, we again go for bishop g4, again pinning this knight. So now bishop c6, and now we have an intermediate move, very nice one, knight h4. The threat is already to take on f3 with a bishop and checkmate the king on the g2 square. That's why white cannot really not care about it and plays king h1. Now bc is happening, but this pin is still there. So queen goes to d3, removing queen from the pin. So now we take with a bishop, pawn takes, and now we go with a queen to f6, and we're already going to win the pawn on f3 with a very nice attacking opportunities against the king on the king side. So that would be just an amazing position to get as black. That was bishop b4, and now let's look at the castle. Well, if white is going for castle, we are just taking now ourselves, because now we're not helping any long castle, nothing. Queen d2, we have a d5 immediately, and it's pretty much a key move. So if we can make it quickly, if we can go for it, then it's going to be good, because we're striking in the center. If white is not letting us do it, then we're doing bad. But if we're making it, then we're doing fine. So bishop c6, this is this typical pawn structure which we might get, having pawns on the c file basically doubled, and this pawn on d5, which is breaking the center. In case pawn takes on d5, here we have an intermediate move, bishop g4, attacking the knight on f3. So knight e5, then we have to trade the knights, and queen d5, and basically, even though our pawn structure is worse, again, okay, there is some attack against the e pawn. We have a very nice bishop also compared to the knight. Also, the knight is still not yet developed. So yeah, I mean, definitely some around equal position in the endgame. And now I want to ask you what to do if white goes for the e5 here. So please stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So white is going for the e5, highlighting that the pawn structure is not so good, that these pawns are weak. And, well, even though there is this very nice pawn on e5, it creates an opportunity for us to go with f6, attacking the pawn and opening up the way for our attack on the king side. Now queen c3, now we go knight c4. Already we're threatening to take on e5. Queen c6 is a bad move, because here bishop d7, and after queen c5 there is bishop b5, and it's actually, according to the computer, already lost for white, because I mean the rook cannot really go to e1 or c1, and yeah, because there's going to be always a knight coming to d3, and yeah, and if in case rook goes to d1, there is going to be bishop e2. So yeah, there are big issues for white here in the position, so it's very tough. So if pawn takes on d5, then we want to take on d5, but we don't want to let white develop with a knight to c3. So that's why we go first knight c7, bringing the knight to attack the pawn on d5, and then we're going to recapture on d5 with the knight. So now we took the knight, and now bishop b3. Now white is attacking us. We have to do something with the knight. We cannot keep it there. So now we take on c3, bc. Now white has kind of the hanging pawns, we can say. Now we go for b5, trying to fix the pawns, going to develop the bishop in the next move on this long diagonal, which is like a very good position for black. Again, according to the computer, around equal, but it's very comfortable for black and no real issues. But that was knight queen d2. Now if knight b d2, then again we're going for d5. We can go for d5, we do it. If e5 is played, now using the fact that the bishop didn't take on c6, we can go with the knight away. Now white didn't make our structure broken with the double pawns. And now in the next moves, we can go for the ideas like knight f4. Also, we could break the center with the f6 break. So many ideas for black. Definitely a counterattack is happening from us. So bishop takes c6 kind of has to be tried in order to try to break the pawn structure, to spoil it. So we take with a b pawn. Now e5, white again is getting this nice pawn in the center, and we're for now following the game with the black pieces of Demchenko. With white pieces Kobalia. So here knight f4, we are already having a very nice square for the knight, rook c1, and now queen d7. We are creating a big threat, by the way. Meanwhile, queen comes to g4 and attacks the pawn on g2 with a checkmate idea. Knight b3, now queen g4, and after g3 we have f6. Breaking up this chain, we're going to put pressure. First of all, there's going to be an issue with the knight on f3 due to opening up the f file. Our bishop is going to join the attack. While white tried to attack our weaknesses on the queen side, we are attacking white's king on the king side. So yeah, huge counter attack here for black. I love position of black since white doesn't really have enough pieces for defense. Okay, that was a bishop d2 move. So now we're going into the main line, which is knight c3 is the most common move to go for it. First of all, it's stopping the check. Secondly, it's also in a way controlling the d5 square, but not fully controlling because the knight is pinned. But after the castle, the knight would control the d5. And of course, as you understand, we have to try to go for d5. If we don't go for d5, then we'll have issues. That's why we go for it instantly in this position, which is very important. So now there are a few moves for white. The main move is to accept this challenge by taking the pawn. There is also castle and e5. So let's start with the e5 move. So in case of e5, then I'm just going to allow black to develop just normally with bishop g4. Now we have two bishops pinning both of the knights. So now already some threat could be there in the position, taking on f3. If queen takes, then the pawn on d4 would be weak, would actually be lost. So after h3, we are taking on f3. And here, a very important intermezzo for white, taking on c6 first with a check, then pawn takes, and then in order to take on f3 with a queen, not with a pawn. And here after castle, we are ready to strike in the center with f6. So this we don't have to be afraid of this pawn structure where we have a pawn on d5, where we have also these double pawns. They could be good. Potentially, we can also get rid of these double pawns with pushing for c5. So we have definitely counterattack with f6 in the position. So white goes for short castle. Now, if we're taking on c3, the problem is that there is an ed move, and after queen d5, there is a bishop b3, which is very annoying, and we're going to transpose to one of the positions we don't want to get into. We're going to talk about this position in the other variation after white is taking on d4 immediately. So that's why here we have to use this time and take on e4. So we should avoid that very bad line. So now knight g5. Idea of knight g5 is highlighting the weakness on f7, also attacking the pawn on e4. The idea is also to take on a c6 and bring the queen to b3 with a double attack. So we have, of course, to castle. We have to remove our king from there, finish the development, defending the pawn on f7, all these moves. Bishop c6, we're taking knight g4. Now white took back the pawn finally. And here we go a5. Now we're already offering some ideas with bishop to be developed to a6. Again, we have bad pawn structure, but we have a bishop pair. So for that, it's a good position. So a3. Now bishop goes to e7. We have to go back. Queen a4. And now f5. Targeting knight, asking the knight to go somewhere. There is a square on c5. And here we go rook b8. Also putting some pressure on the pawn on the b file so that bishop cannot develop so easily. So now queen c6, and now we have queen d4. Now bishop e3 is coming with a tempo so that we cannot take on d2, but after queen f6, we're just getting a very comfortable position. This pawn is hanging now. We have a bishop pair, so yeah, definitely. And we don't have already weak pawns because white took the pawn on c6, so definitely a slight better position due to the bishop pair advantage. If queen comes to h5 with the threat of a checkmate, we have to go h6, okay, the only move. Now knight f7. So basically, in this position, we shouldn't really forget that we took a pawn on e4, so we still have a pawn. And white is now just taking a pawn on f7, so that we're kind of giving back the pawn. If queen takes on g6, we're taking another pawn on d4, and okay, if white is taken on e4, we're going to be we're going to have a materially equal position, no worries. But after, for example, bishop c6, pawn takes c6, queen g6, again we have queen d4, and we have a bishop pair. We are for a moment up a pawn, but of course our pawns are weak. White could take on c6, for example, the pawn, or the pawn on e4, definitely possible. But we have the semi-open file, target on f2. We have developed pieces, and the ideas of playing bishop a6 at some moment, a5, bishop a6, bringing the rook also to the f file, putting pressure on f7. I mean, we have big chances in this position. Computer says the position is equal, but I would say we have decent chances to fight for a win as well. So if knight takes on e4, then we castle, and d5 is kind of a try. I mean, generally it would be a great position to have it. if pawn couldn't march forward to d5, then we would have a lot of chances here due to the isolated queen's pawn. But the problem is the pawn can go forward with d5. Now we have to go back with a knight to e7. In case of a3 attacking our uh, bishop, we have an intermediate, very, very important move. Bishop f5 attacking the knight on e4. Now knight goes back to g3, and here we go bishop d6. So we're ready to give up the pawn on f5, but not the bishop on, sorry, the bishop on f5, but not the bishop on d6. It's strong piece, which is blocking the pawn on d5. So knight takes a5, knight f5, and bishop c2, queen d7. We're getting into the position where white is having a bishop pair, but bad pawn structure. In that position, we're just going to play out. If we manage to trade one of the bishop, it's going to be great. We'll try to put more pressure on the pawn on d5. So definitely interesting position to play, very unbalanced. So bishop b3, defending the pawn also goes back. Now we go h6. Very important to stop any kind of bishop g5 ideas. So now a3 attacking our bishop. Bishop goes back to a5. So now, of course, if we would go back to d6, then it would be much easier for white to develop. So now we have control of the e1 square. And here, if white is going for d5, of course, it would just simplify the position a lot because trades are going to happen. So knight f5, dc, queen c7. We got rid of the c and d pawns with white. We are getting into the endgame. We have good pieces. We have active pieces. And both sides have bishop pairs. So around equal position, I mean, not much to say. Pretty symmetrical. Bishop e2 coming back with the bishop. Idea is to strike our bishop on a5 with the b4, bringing the bishop to b2 and putting it on this long diagonal. So here we have to go for b5. Now, the point is that we also want our bishop on the long diagonal, which would attack the pawn on d5. So b4, bishop b6, bishop b2, bishop b7. So we have pretty similar bishops on both diagonal. Very interesting. We are targeting the pawn on d5. White is defending the pawn on d5, also targeting at some moment something on the king side. Not yet, but trying. I mean, actually, it looks like at the first glance now pretty static position, but it's going not to be very static in the next moves. It will be very dynamic, so we have to get ready for any kind of action and attack from white. And at the same time, we're already threatening to take the pawn on d5, by the way. We're already winning it, so white will have to do something or find some initiative counterplay for that pawn, for sure. So that was the castle. And basically, e takes d4 is the main move. And now we're going to transpose to that variation we were talking about. So here it looks very tempting, and I would say when we are playing blitz, retaking the pawn looks like the most natural move in the world, but it's actually so bad. It's super bad move because in this position, white has a castle, and okay, now knight is attacking the d5 queen. Well, and what you say, okay, I take on c3, they take back, and we're just castling and we're just having good position. But who said that they're going to take back? There is a bishop b3, very, very annoying intermezzo. Our king is still in the center. And the point in this position, when we actually get here, our main idea is to put the queen to h5, bishop to g4, and put pressure against this knight, also attacking on h2 at some moment. But queen aims to go for h5 square. Then this position, if we go to h5, then there is going to be bishop f7 check, king takes, and knight g5, losing queen, full queen. So for that reason, we have to be very tricky. I mean, not very tricky, but very smart. And we don't take on d5 first, but we include bishop c3 intermezzo, because we anyway want to get into that position, right? We want anyway to get into this position. So why to allow all these extra options for white? This is also probably advice for other positions. If you can force it into the position which you want to get without giving extra chances for the opponent, it's always a good choice. So in this position, we take on c3 first with a check. White is forced to take, and now we take with the queen to d5. And of course, if now bishop attacks our queen, it's a different position because white hasn't castled yet either. So, and if white is castling, we're just castling. But of course, there are also some other moves, not only castle is possible. So there are different moves in this position. For example, there is a bishop to b3. There is a bishop to a3, stopping the check, stopping the castle. Queen e2 check, and okay, of course, castle is the main move. So let's start with the bishop a3 because it looks very tempting to put the bishop on a3, cutting our king, and trying to stop our development. I had actually game in this position, and here I played queen e4. I believe I won that game. It was in Spilimbergo 2024. I played queen e4 here, but there is no reason not to play bishop g4, just attacking the knight and creating already opportunities to spoil the structure for white. So now, in case white castle, we castle long already. White stopped us from castling short, but we were happy to castle long. And we're just having a very good position. Big pressure on f3 square. There's going to be an issue with the king. So yeah, definitely. And also, let's not forget, just for a moment, that there is knight h4 coming using the spin. So let's see what happens after queen e2. So queen e2 check. And here we have kind of two moves with the king. I mean, unless we want to stop with a queen or the rook or the bishop, but we shouldn't because now it's actually a big threat of rook e8 coming. So we go for king d8. We got rid of the castle, but after castle of white, we have rook e8. And now after queen goes away, first of all, there is going to be an issue on f3. And again, this knight h4 is a big threat in the position as well. So it's very tough for white. It's going to be very tough for white to continue. And our king is on d8. Is for the moment it's safe. We can later go for bringing the rook out and then hide the king on c8 if we're worried about it. Artificially castling, but position is great for blacks. Clearly better. h3 attacking our bishop on g4. Well, here we can take already. Queen takes. We are making the structure spoiled on the king side for white, and after long castle, we are already ready to go for the knight a4. This is very typical move in this position, knight a4. Sorry, knight a5, rook d5. White has many pawn islands, many weaknesses, so we'll try to use the fact and attack them. Even though white has a bishop pair, which probably compensates in some way for this pawn structure, but we're definitely having big chances in this endgame. So this was bishop a3, bit strange move. So now bishop b3. Now let's see the difference with this bishop b3 move. Of course, we still cannot go with queen h5 because again, for the same problem, we cannot go bishop h5. But we have now check. We play queen e4. We check the king. We check the king, and now there are some moves here in the position. There is king f1. There is queen e2. So there is bishop e3. So with bishop e3, we just castle, and now we are ready to go bishop g4. So we have similar position as the queen on h5, because from e4 also we are attacking the knight. Knight e2, it's the same move as knight g5 as well. Similar, it's going to transpose because we take on d1, knight takes on e4, bishop b3, pawn takes. Now b6, we're stopping knight from entering our position and attack the pawns on the b7 and a6. So now we're getting some good position. So d5, now rook f8 with an intermediate move. And this game was actually played in the game Federchuk-Pichot in 2023. So white has no real advantage here. The game finished also in a draw. So the draw is expected result, but of course anything can happen still. We can try to push for more if we want. And queen e2 is another move, but then we're just trading the queens, and after knight e5, attacking the bishop is just we can take the bishop at any moment. We're just going to stop these pawns on c3 and d4 with, for example, like b5, or we can develop bishop to f5, castle short, and so on. So yeah, we have definitely good position. And king f1. This move actually was played against me in one of the games and the European Women Championship in 2024. My opponent name she was from Azerbaijan. She was Allah Verdieva. She played king f1, and here, I mean, I knew what to play, and I went for for the correct move. The castle would not be really good because we have to be careful. Now bishop a3 is a very strong move. Now if rook e8 has happened, there is this bishop f7 trick with knight g5. And after king f7, we are losing. So knight c e7, and here after h4, again, many threats are happening, so I didn't play this move, castle. We played bishop g4, which we also recommend, of course. And now we're also open to castle long at some moment. And at this moment, we didn't yet analyze this move, and my opponent came up with an interesting move, h4 here. I knew only h3 and h4 I didn't know, and well, the game went not so well for me because I was not ready for this move. But I mean, I was considering also the long castle and other moves. I already don't remember what I played, but yeah, the correct way to react to it is playing h6. So idea is, of course, that there are no knight coming to g5, and also stopping white's pawn on h5 square, so there is no h6 anymore. And in case white goes for h5, which is the main idea of white, then we go with a knight to e7. And after rook h4, which was also the main idea of this whole setup with h5, h4, bringing the rook and pinning our bishop on g4, then we're going for long castle. Because if we're taking on f3, we are not going to do well, because at the end we're just getting into this pretty bad endgame. We're very passive. White has a bishop pair, so yeah, pretty tough endgame, more space on the king side. If queen goes to f5, there is rook g4 takes, and after bishop f7, again, this trick with the knight always is there, so it's not really working out. Actually, not on e5 because knight takes, but on knight g5 after king f7. Because actually it would be a blunder from white, so here knight g5 has to be played. So we have to go for the long castle, and now we're already threatening to remove our queen from the pin. There are no threats of bishop f7 like before with all these tricks, or rook g4. So if white is taking now, then it's happening without any threat, and we can bring our rook, putting pressure on the knight. We can go for knight f5, and we're just better. And if queen goes to c2, then we are trading the queens and removing the bishop to f5, offering a trade for the bishops, and we're just going to have interesting endgame where most likely we're going to manage to trade these bishops. So white will not have a bishop pair, but even if white will have bishop pair, there will be some pawn structure issues for white in return for those bishop pair, because the pawns cannot really move here. The pawns are stuck on c3 and d4. So yeah, and we can try to put some pressure on those pawns later on, and yeah, I mean, definitely balanced position and good try. So h3 is another move which can be played in this position, but here we are kind of forced to take on f3, which we're doing, take. If queen f3, we're just trading and getting into nice endgame. We are going to have knights against bishops for the pawn structure, so definitely around equal position. So pawn takes on f3, we go for queen h4, and again, we're just going to have the ideas of knight a5. King is a bit weak, I mean, because of all the open squares. Our knights are also good pieces in this position. We are ready to castle, we already finished the development, and yeah, have just a good endgame. Even though white has a bishop pair, we're fine. So now we go for the queen e2, so in case of queen e2, we can go queen e6 here, stopping the check. If d5, queen e2, king e2, and b5 intermezzo, dc and ba, and we just get into the equal position, so that in case something like this happens. All right, so that were all like this not main moves. Now we're going to go into the main castle. Okay, so now castle happens. Now we have this pawn structure. We gave up white the bishop pair advantage, but white has these pawns on c3 and c4, and we have a queen on d5. And again, what I was telling before, in this pawn structure and in this kind of position, we would love to put our bishop on g4, bring the queen to h5. And this bishop b3 is always a threat, attacking our queen, since the bishop f7 could be always a threat. So that's why we have to castle as fast as possible. And now already this bishop b3 is not so problematic. So let's start with some normal moves. Let's say white is going for rook e1. Well, it's not bringing too much problems in our position because bishop g4, we are just pinning the knight as we wanted. h3, bishop takes, queen takes. We're spoiling pawn structure, going for knight a5. And the next move, we're going to blockade the pawns on the c3 and d4. We also have threats of attacking the pawns on the queen-king side, bringing the rooks out. So just definitely interesting counterplay from black in this endgame. In case h3 is played, we're just stopping our bishop coming to g4, which looks very logical. And now bishop b3 is a threat. Now we go knight a5, very interesting. So now we are stopping bishop coming to b3. Now our queen on d5 is very safe. And the next move, we want to go for b5, kicking the bishop from a4. And if bishop goes to c2, we will have bishop f5 trading the pieces. So if bishop goes to a3 attacking our rook, it's not really helping much because we have rook d8. And after rook e1, we have b5, bishop goes away, and bishop f5, offering a trade of the bishops. And if we're trading this bishop, we're absolutely fine. And we're doing pretty well. So if rook e1, then we have b5 again. Bishop goes to c2, and again f5, and trading the bishop pair would just eliminates problems for us. And also we could put the knight on this beautiful c4 square, and other knight would go to d5. Yeah, we'll just going to have a good position, good endgame, and with some chances, of course. Also, yeah, I think that's either I think I had some similar position in one of the games, actually. It finished in a draw. It was against some FIDE master. It was very sharp position later. So I thought actually that it was actually close. I thought that someone of us was going to win. It was so crazy that the game finished in a draw, because in very sharp position, my opponent offered a draw to me. And I was like, all right, I have to agree, because, and actually according to computer, I was worse, I think, a couple of moves before. So it was good that I agreed to a draw. So yeah. So rook e1, so b5, bishop c2, bishop f5. Yeah, we already discussed this. And now we're going for the main move, which is bishop b3, immediately attacking our queen without letting knight jumping to a5. So now we go queen h5. This is our favorite square. And we have already ideas of bringing the bishop to g4. So here there are quite a few moves from white. First of all, white could go h3, stopping this bishop coming to g4. Also, white could use the fact that bringing the knight somewhere to d2 and g4 to trade the queens, and also there is bishop a3 attacking our rook. So let's start with knight d2. So knight goes to d2. We're trading the pieces. We don't have other choice. And now we go knight a5, attacking the bishop. And after knight c4, we are trading. And after f6, we are getting a pretty even position. We have opposite colored bishops in this endgame. Again, both sides would have some chances, but very equalish position. In case white goes to h3, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black here. Yeah, so of course we go knight a5. This is our key move in the position. We always go knight a5, then b5, and so on, and trying to block the pawns on c3 and d4. So bishop goes to c2. We're trading the bishops. This is very important. Bishop f5, and if knight goes to e5, so here of course white is offering a trade. Of course we have to take the queen. Now bishop takes. In that way, white could keep the bishop. But after rook e8, I mean, we're getting a very even endgame, so it's tough to say that white has some chances. Bishop can go to e6, controlling the pawns, or to f5. So yeah, definitely we have even position. If bishop a3 comes immediately, and it's actually a very important position, please remember the next move which we should play, because bishop a3, it feels like, oh, of course, yeah, rook is under attack. Well, let's move the rook. Where should we move it? Let's just move rook to d8, because because we don't want to allow any problem on f7, so just rook to d8. But actually we are allowing problems, because after rook to d8, there is knight e5, intermediate move. Since after taking on d1, it's a no check, so white has time to take on f7 with a check, king h8, knight g6, pawn takes, And after rook takes, we are going to be down a pawn, but in completely lost endgame with rook d3, rook h3 coming already with a checkmate threat. So this is very bad. We shouldn't allow this. So we have to remember for the move bishop g4, not caring about rook and f8, and rather putting pressure on white on f3. And also I would like you to understand that this pin is actually very annoying for white, because now the huge threat is knight h4. Let's say white is not caring about it and playing bishop f8, taking our rook. And here we don't care about the rook, about the bishop, but we play knight h4. And now in position already there is a huge threat. Bishop f3, pawn takes, let's say after rook c1, bishop f3, pawn takes, and here there is going to be a checkmate. So huge threats are in position already. So white has to do something and give up the material playing bishop takes f7. That's the only way how to go in order to stop this ideas from black. So we have to take the bishop on f7. Now knight g5, attacking our queen. We take the queen of white. They take our queen. We take, and at the end of the line, we're having a position where we have two pieces, two knights for the rook and the pawn. Materially speaking, it's equal because it's knight is knight worth three pawns, so 6 pawns altogether, and rook worth 5 pawns with 1 pawn, 6 pawns. But actually, in this position, we would still have slight advantage due to the all pawns weaknesses. So we could try to create attack against it. There is only one open file. But it's also going to be not so easy for white to get on that file to make a use out of it. And yeah, of course, we are going to attack here. We're going to create some threats. We're going to attack the pawns, and white will be the one who will have to fight for a draw. That was bishop a3, and now knight g5, jumping with knight forward. This is the most common move in this position. Also attacking the pawn on f7. Okay, of course, we have to trade the queens. Queen takes, rook takes, and now we go knight a5, very important because bishop a3 was a big threat, attacking our rook, so we go knight a5. And well, there is basically the key in this position just to force this bishop away. And for example, after bishop c2, we just go rook e8, f3, and now b6. We're going to develop with the next moves playing h6. Kicking the knight out of g5, bringing the bishop to b7. We're just having a round equal endgame with chances for both sides. Even though white has a bishop pair, they're not so much better pieces than ours because the position is not so open and there are no targets for these bishops. That was all in this chapter. Now I would like us to go through the most important ideas from the chapter and try to remember the main ideas and the main topical moves which we have to remember. So first of all, this position, I would like just to point out generally this approach. So if we put our knight on g6 and white is going for h5, h4, h5 idea, that we should remember that we shouldn't go for h5. That's very important. We shouldn't lose the time with h5 because for white it's going to be an achievement. For us it's going to be bad because if white now includes d4, it would be different to the lines with just going for d4 because it would allow this g4 big problems on g5 square. That's why we have to play bishop e7, and coming to the position after h5. Of course, we go forward with the knight to f4. We're not coming to h4, it doesn't make sense. So now knight comes to f4, threatening knight d3 and taking on g2. And here, basically, we should remember that we can take on g2 and return via the h4 square. We shouldn't worry about any issues there. So next position is when we don't have a chance to go for d5 and we don't have a chance to go for f5. Then we have to remember that we should put the knight on e5 and to go for g4 or f4 squares, targeting the bishop on e3. That's kind of one of the main idea. And generally, if we cannot break, then we should do something with our pieces, improve them, jump around, attack white's pieces. So because this e4 pawn, of course, is not such a big pawn, but generally, of course, it's space advantage in the center for white. which we should try to either attack or challenge or something like this. Because if we just wait and white will go with f4, that's at some moment also f5 or e5. So we definitely shouldn't allow that. That was another position. Okay, next position is okay. So I would rather say this position is very important. Yes, here. So the last move was h4. So d4 was played with took on d4, and now white played h4. So now the idea is for white, if we play h5, that white would retake on d4 and play knight c3, and we would have position with the h4, h5 included, which we actually didn't want to have in the first place. If we take on c3 with intermat, so knight takes, we're just helping white to develop. And okay, white could go like h5, and okay, if we go h5, h4, the knight is already out in the position, so it's not working. So we have to slow down white by playing d3, not allowing any take on d4 and knight c3, and not allowing this knight take on c3. So now if white is taking on d3, white is slowing down because there will be issues with development. And now already we can go for h5. Now we can stop this h5, but this knight will not be developed so easily. So white will have to play bishop e3, then knight d2, and so on. So this is pretty important. Okay, next position is where we go. Yeah, we go with this d5 break, and generally we will get often this kind of structure with double pawns, but we shouldn't really worry much. Okay, e5 normally is played. We shouldn't worry much because here we will always have some ideas, either of challenging the pawn on e5 or bringing the knight and attacking the king on the king side. And also at some moment c5 break would be also possible. So we definitely have many ideas here, and since we have this weakness on the queen side, we shouldn't be too much worried because we have in exchange our own perks in this position. So bishop takes on. Yeah, this is very important. Yeah, this is very important to remember. Not taking with the queen automatically on d5 after pawn takes on d5, but first to force white to take on c3 with the pawn and then go into this. Because again, if we're going to go into the queen d5 castle and then take, white is not forced to take. It's not checkers. Take is not forced. So there is bishop b3, very, very, yeah, I mean, like, basically here we have to play something like, I mean, queen f5, like, just trying to keep this position together. But of course, it's not ideal square and it's stopping our bishop development. So that's why very important here after take, intermediate move, take with a check, pawn takes, and now queen d5. And now we're getting in the position what we wanted. So next position and the last one is when white played bishop a3. Yeah, this is very important also to remember that if we just move rook away, there is a bishop f7 here. Yeah, so bishop f7 was generally against pawn, which was defended by the king due to the jump with the knight to e5 or g5. And in this position, again, it's a threat. So rook goes away, bishop takes, king takes. No, sorry. Yeah, actually, yes. And now, oh, wait a second. Here it's first, sorry, it's not working. So first knight e5, because now queen d8, now takes, and now getting into this endgame, yeah. Sorry, yeah. So that's why we have to remember for this and not move the rook at all and play bishop g4, and pointing out that white has an issue on f3 with the next move coming knight to h4, big issues and already checkmate threats against white's king. So it's not only a pin, but it's a deadly pin. So after taking on f8, white would have to give up the material, as we were also discussing in this line. But very important move, bishop g4 with knight h4 ideas. That was it for today. I hope you learned from Cozio this c3 fifth move, how to handle it, what to do. And I'm looking forward to see you in the next chapter.